I'm going to create another layer, and this layer I'm going to use to add a little bit more density to everything that I'm doing here. I'm not quite sure about this. I want to experiment, but this is all looking a little too, how do I say it? Still too plump. So I'm going to go down in my subdivision levels. Symmetry is on, move brush, and let's start to, I want to trim the cheekbones. In my mind it's too strong. So we're taking that down a notch. The chin, all of that, there's still a lot of flesh in that chin, so I'm a little concerned. And at this point I might use H polish to just tamp down some things. So I'm using H polish and I'm trying to approach it from a planar perspective. More planes the better, and short strokes. Yeah. Okay, I feel better about the cheekbones, but now mandible is, we got to do some work. Switching over to the move brush using my hotkeys. Yeah, there we go. I like. Look at it from below, make sure we get that horseshoe shape. The jaw has a specific horseshoe shape for the top portion. So I'm just trying to make sure I get that dent in. Yeah. And then in terms of the mandible, the jaw here, the ramus, the head of the mandible, is really important to keep some structure in mind for that. Really important. Because we're losing the masseter, or we're losing a good bit of the masseter. The masseter is the chewing muscle. And even though zombies are great at chewing, that's going to really go down and just become just a couple flayed bits of flesh, right? So I'm going to use clay buildup, and I'm going to really limit that masseter. It's going to be just this little tiny thing. They get their chewing power from supernatural sources. Okay. I feel better about that. That's less human, more zombie. Okay, I got another thing I need to do that I don't feel comfortable with, and that's the temporalis. So this area in a skull has a lot of depth. So if the temporalis muscle is it's along the temporal line, and temporal bone, and it's coming down and attaching to the masseter, not to the masseter, but to the ramus, not to the ramus, but to the mandible. Sorry. So it's attaching to this guy, and it helps with our chewing as well. But there is an enormous amount of space there in between the zygomatic and the actual bone, part of which is going to really distort the ear, make it larger like an older person. So I'm just going to really emphasize the zygomatic bone. So the zygomatic bone right here, this is going to really get emphasized. And with the move brush, I'm going to press Alt and push in. Alt and push in. And I'm just losing some of this form, and let's lose some of that in the inside of the eye. Alt and push in. Already looks better. Or it looks more zombie-like, less human. Okay, let's do a comparison. up to the top. And I'm going to snapshot this model of canvas. It's something you'll see me do a lot in my exercises. I come up to transform, and this camera icon, you can just snapshot it and then move the model. You can press Control N to clear it. And the hotkey is Shift S. So you'll see me press Shift S a lot. Alright, I'm going to turn the recording off and turn the eye icon off. And you can see the difference, right? The other one still had all the fleshiness of youth, basically. And we really needed to get in there and tear that apart and just go as skeletal as we could. The primary areas that we changed, temporalis and the mandible area. Those are the primary things that we changed. Okay, Control N to clear. Turn that back on and just go into record mode. Actually, we'll go into record mode for the second layer, because the second layer is the one that has all of the clay buildup stuff. So clay buildup it is, and I'm going to make sure that my depth in bed is set kind of high now, because I want a couple of just major strokes. And dotting. By dotting, I mean my stroke is a little uneven. Okay, I'm going to pull that back a bit. Let's do it from the side here. And why don't I push in to try to find the bone? It's messing up the sculpt I just did, but that's fine. Okay, turn symmetry off. I say it's fine because I like to resculpt those things. You may have wanted to turn symmetry off a bit earlier. Switching to the move brush, pushing in. Really losing that volume, getting that closer to the maxilla. And over to Damien's standard brush. I'm going to redraw my lines. Smooth. H polish. Damien's standard brush. Okay, now you're seeing me go up to the menu a lot. I don't do that when I'm sculpting. I'm doing that right now so you see what I'm doing, but usually I'll use the brush keys. B for brush pop-up, and then the first letter of the brush. So for example, H for H polish. That's usually what I'll do, but in the beginning part here I like to make sure you are seeing what I'm doing. Okay, I'm comfortable with this as just something for us to start to work with. There's stuff to be doing, but the goal, if I haven't said it enough times, the goal is to be loose and to just kind of let things happen. And now we're going to slowly start to go in and refine form and see what we can do in order, in the sense, post-processing this and starting to add a little bit more fleshy qualities to it. Really start working on that. Okay, I said I'm comfortable with this, but I'm just fixing a couple of things I'm not sure about. Getting a little bit of that orbicularis oculi. And this is just desiccated flesh. So interweaving the clay buildup back and forth. Not a bad idea to do that in any of these areas that are starting to look repetitive. Just weave the clay buildup. back and forth. You might want to use a smaller one and go slower. As I mentioned, I'm speedily approaching all of this stuff so you don't get too terribly bored. Too terribly. But I hope you're doing this with me as we're approaching this. Okay, interweaving, interweaving, interweaving. Okay, interweaving is actually more important than you might think. It's really important for this next step. So I'll leave a little bit of it without the interweaving and some of it with different degrees of interweaving, so we can kind of judge what was more successful and what was less successful. I'm going to tear into the corner of the eye there a little bit, though. That's a little too pretty. There we go. Alright. I'm in okay shape with that. That's a mess of a face. So make sure you save your project. Okay, I'm going to save it right now in camera with you. And I'm going to save this and say we're ready now to move on to the next step where we start to look at some post-processing.